So Natalie and I have been talking about actually what's so great about doing local type of events. One of the greatest things that you actually can do is make homemade cheese. So one of the great things we also have out here is a wonderful dairy by the name of Naked Cow Dairy, I believe. Today we're actually going to be using a Hawaii Fresh dairy from Hilo, the Big Island. It's really nice, it's really sweet. One of the most important things actually about making cheese in this modern day is a lot of times dairies actually have to pasteurize their milk, which actually means bring up the temperature of milk to a certain temperature to kill off any type of microorganisms. And that's just common practice to make sure that the milk is sanitary and there's not a lot of pathogenic bacteria or parasites or anything like that. Now, that's not to say that if you were actually able to get raw milk, it would have those things. It's just a precautionary method. Now, with the advent of mass production, they needed to actually ensure that milk became even more aseptic, more clean, more filtered, so to speak. So what they did is they created a technique called ultra pasteurization. So sometimes you'll see on milk containers saying UP, pretty much ultra pasteurized. Coincidentally, a lot of organic milks actually are UP, which is not bad if you want to drink it, but if you actually want to do cheese, you want to make yogurt, you want to make anything that's cultured or aged, so we say, is actually pasteurized. And that's actually the milk that we want to use, either that or raw milk. So coincidentally, on Oahu and in Hilo and pretty much all the other islands that are local, they use pasteurized milk, which is really good. And what that also means for us is that because the milk hasn't been heated up to a certain temperature, that means that we're actually able to catch it in the middle up to, let's say, a degree of 80 or 90 degrees, bring up the milk a little bit, make the proteins actually kind of collect onto each other with the assistance of heat, with the assistance of some type of acid or some type of enzyme. Now, enzymes are kind of like these little chemical packets, and then when they attach themselves onto, let's say, a milk protein, they actually change the structure of this protein. So imagine if you had a really clean, really slender piece of hair, right, like on top of your head. And what would you want to do if you wanted to tease it? You would add heat, you would add some type of conditioner to it, even some type of acid to it, and what would that do is kink it all up. It's the same thing with milk protein, the same thing with milk itself. And in milk, it's pretty much a couple components: water, fat, and protein. That's all it is. And so what we're trying to do is we're trying to make the protein inside the water kink up alongside the fat. And that's where we get the richness and the creaminess, and that's where we get like the difference between a cow's milk and a goat's milk and a sheep's milk. So one of the most basic cheeses you can do is actually a mozzarella or a farmer's cheese. Some have heard of a paneer. And paneer is pretty much milk and some type of acid. So sometimes they use vinegar, sometimes they use lemon juice. In mozzarella, it's a really simple process. You take your milk container, pour it into a pot, bring it up to about 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and what you would do is then you would add a product called citric acid. And what the great thing about citric acid is that it's naturally derived. So you take any type of citrus and that kind of like bright, tangy flavor, that's what citric acid is. And a lot of manufacturers will use that as a nutritional supplement. And now what we have is citric acid in granular form. And it's almost kind of like when you've seen gummy bears with those little kind of fuzzy crystals on it, and you put it in your mouth, you're like, oh my god, it's so tangy. That is what citric acid is. But the cool thing is it's also an acid, and when you apply it to a protein and milk under a certain temperature, it coagulates, it congeals, and forms a little curd. So as you can see right here, this is a little bit of what milk looks like when it's coagulated. It almost looks like cottage cheese, and that's pretty much what it is. Now, the one thing that's really cool about adding citric acid to it is from that stage, you're good. If you want to make a cheese and you let it sit and settle and become almost like a big brick of tofu, that's what you can do. Now, what cultures have done in the past is they added this type of milk protein to essentially an animal product, which would be a stomach or intestine. And in that intestine, there's those little enzymes I talked about, rennet. Rennet is the enzyme that actually assists the coagulation of that milk, furthering the change of the milk protein to even more kinky, even more tight. And what you have is, a firm product. It's almost kind of like, I'm trying to think of a way to explain it. It's kind of like, I'm sorry? Play-Doh. It is kind of like Play-Doh, but what's cool about it is that if you take like an egg and you put it in a little water, it'll kind of be soft set. And then if you keep cooking and keep cooking, it'll become even more firm set. And that's what kind of rennet does with citric acid, with heat, and with drainage. So we spoke about actually milk being protein, fat, and water. So you can see right here, this protein has been coagulated with citric acid and rennet and heat. And what comes out is whey. Now, there's that old type of, story with milk, curds, and whey. Essentially, this is what it is. This is the liquid that is residual of the milk protein. You can actually consume this. This is really, really good for you. If you are, let's say, in a situation where you actually need more calcium in your diet, what actually has calcium in milk is not the protein, but actually the whey. So you want to have more calcium in your diet? Drink lots of whey. It's a little tangy, it's a little salty, but it's actually overall good for you. And you can take that whey product and you can actually pickle with it, you can ferment with it. A lot of really great Asian cultures, they actually will take the whey that they reserve and actually take pickles and cabbage and throw it in there and let it at room temperature and ferment. So the cool thing about milk is that there's multiple purposes, there's multiple uses, and it all tastes really good. So what I'm doing right now is actually heating up some salted water. And this is actually for actually pulling the curd. So we've gone through the whole process of adding acid and adding rennet to the milk, coagulating it, letting it sit, and then what we do is we drain it off from that whey liquid. And this is what we get, which is pretty much a curd. You can leave it at that stage and have ricotta. Ricotta essentially is milk that has had an acid applied to it under a really high temperature. So about 170 degrees to 180 degrees, if you let those milk proteins work and hang out, they will actually form smaller like nuggets. And that's that protein kind of not being able to collect together. And you can actually have ricotta. And this is what this is. This was made this morning. It's really good, and you can actually taste the nice sweetness of the milk. You don't even have to add anything to it. But of course you can add salt, you can add pepper, you can add a little bit of olive oil, a little basil, a little tomatoes. Of course you can do whatever you want. I kind of like it just plain and simple myself. Now, if you do all those things to make the rennet, or to make the cheese, the curd, you can go one step further and you can take this ball and apply it to hot water, about 135 degrees. And what that does is you're actually taking those proteins we're talking about that are all bunched up onto each other and actually say, hey, we're gonna get even more cozy. We're actually gonna become even more uniform. So what we have here is like curds like this. With the application of heat, we're actually gonna make the curds form into like almost like a really uniform structure. And what you're gonna start to see is like a nice cohesion of protein. Now, you can season this or you cannot. I choose to. And what a lot of people do historically is actually have water that's as salty as the ocean. That is pretty much what they say. When you're making pasta, that's what they say as well. Taste the water, it has to be salty as the ocean, it's properly seasoned. So that's what we did here. So I'm going to show you a little thing. So really boiling hot water, flesh, doesn't work really well. Burns really bad. In fact, I think I'm actually going to double blow. And what we're going to do is we're actually going to take the milk curd and we're going to apply it to the hot water. Thank you. And what we're going to do after that is we're going to actually kind of form it. We're going to knead it, almost kind of like you're forming Play-Doh and silly putty like yours is. But again, I want to protect myself because I don't like getting burnt, especially with scalding hot water. So what I kind of do is I'll take this ladle, put this curd right here that I've already pressed, and I'm going to actually dip it into this hot boiling water. Now, it's going to give off a little bit of kind of particles. If you guys want to step a little closer so you can see how it's kind of just holding together, but not really falling apart, right? So we're going to dip it, and we're going to press it. Right? So look, now it's starting to hold back together. So we're going to take it, put in a little more water, and do the same thing. Kind of press it and knead it. Right? So now look, it's kind of gummy. It's like a paste. But the thing is you want to keep actually boiling it, because when you do that, you're actually coaxing the proteins to become more and more intimate with each other, a little more friendly. You guys have any questions about anything?
Anywhere? Like, do you have any Whole Foods website or
What's that?
all your instructions?
We do. We actually printed out some basic general instructions. We actually have a lovely product over here. It's called Mozzarella Cheese Making Kit. What's really cool is that in that little package, there's really good directions and actually all the ingredients to make mozzarella. $20.99. You actually buy a 1 gallon of milk and you apply all of those components to it, the rennet, the citric acid, the salt. It includes gloves, includes a thermometer, and pretty much gives you step-by-step instructions on actually how to do this. Now,
how many of those spoonfuls is it going to make?
Now, this is what's kind of cool. I actually like to do this process a day in advance, make the curd, and let it dry out really, really well so it's dry. And when I do that, it makes the ability to actually put the curd in the water better, because when you have water like we do now in here and put water into water, it's actually going to make the whole curd kind of fall apart. But you just can kind of knead it out. So what I'm doing right here is kneading out these curds. But in 1 gallon of milk, you probably can get almost about 9 little balls of mozzarella. That's about key lime size. And I think that's actually a pretty good deal, considering that if you do buy milk or you do buy mozzarella, it costs anywhere between, let's say, $6 to $9.
I'm really surprised it takes that much, yeah? So when you get that mozzarella, the prices are pretty good for what they have to go through.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So it seems like our milk protein is starting to kind of fall apart, which might happen. Yeah. Let's see.
You don't even realize it takes that much work.
Yeah.
You know?
So,
Oh, that's so much work. I can't even believe it.
yeah, as of right now, this is what happens when the curd does not form and congeal together. Now, at this stage, this is actually still edible. This is almost very similar to like a mascarpone cheese. And the cool thing about mozzarella is that in all those steps and applications, you can make mozzarella, you can make ricotta, you can make mascarpone, all from the same product.